The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast. I'm Tullio Siragusa. I'm joined again by Joshua Preiser. We are talking about how to maximize your investment dollars for marketing. This is a series of 5 podcasts where we are providing some insights and some education and perhaps some new ideas for marketers and marketers alike on how to best utilize their dollars to get the best outcome for their marketing investment. In the last episode 1, we talked about how to turn marketing into investment, how to not treat it as a cost, the importance of being dynamic with how you invest. And we also introduced the concept of ROAS. Today, we're going to focus more on setting goals and expectations, how you can maximize ROAS, return on ad spend, which has direct correlation to return on investment, as we discussed in the last episode. Josh, welcome back. Looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I'm as well. This is probably my favorite topic in the entire world of marketing.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's kick it right off and just jump right in, right? Now, question 1, how do you set realistic goals for marketing investment? We talked about being dynamic with those investments in the last show, now having fixed budgets, but how do you set realistic goals in how you invest your marketing dollars?
Yeah. Well, first thing you have to do is outline your sales funnel. And a great tool for this is Google's conversion value calculator. In fact, we can walk through an example here. Let's if we can share that screen. There we go.
Do it.
Yeah. So if you want to find this on your own, just do a Google search for Google conversion value calculator, and you'll end up with this great tool here. And let's go through an example of a company that does window treatments. Right? Blinds, shades, shutters, etc. So the first thing you do is you start by entering the conversion action you're tracking that creates a lead. And I'll make a note that it is important to do this process for every different type of lead. So example, for a window treatment company, one type of lead would be a phone call. Another type of lead might be a contact form on the website. Those are going to have very likely different results through this process. And we'll get into that, but let's just take one. So let's say our initial contact with a customer is a phone call. Okay, great. They call us. What happens next? Well, the next thing they do is they book an appointment for an in-home consult. All right, they book an appointment. So now, what percentage of people that call book an appointment? Now we're starting to see how important it is to track and know your conversion rates at every step of the lead funnel. Now, a lot of times we don't know these numbers when we're first starting because they haven't been tracked before. But now's the time. Now's the time. Start tracking this. Track it over a 1-month period, a 3-month period, a 6-month period, a year, and figure out what your numbers are here. But for now, we're going to put in best guesses, right? Let's say 90% of the people who ended up calling end up booking an appointment. All right, what's the next step? The next step is actually having that appointment. Now, again, this is another example of where it's important to think through every step, right? I've had people tell me, well, we book the phone call and then we have an appointment. But what they fail to think about is, some people cancel those appointments and never reschedule, right? So you want to make sure, think through every last detail, right?
There's a conversion ratio for the call to the appointment, from the appointment to the actual in-person.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So let's say 1 out of 20 cancels and we never talk to them again, right? Okay, so we have a 95% conversion rate from a booked appointment to actually having the appointment. Are there any more stages? Yes. We can put on as many stages as we want. And sometimes I see 2 stages. Sometimes I see, 7, 8, 9, 10 stages. But most of the time,
there's that reminder of the appointment, and some fall off of that one too.
Yeah, exactly. So So now we have the in-person consult. What's the next stage there? Well, next we put together an estimate, right? We put together the estimate. And I typically, if we have the in-person consult, we're going to do an estimate, right? So we could probably even say that's 100%. But maybe it's not for your business. You'd have to figure that out. But let's say, no, yes, we have another. And then from there, we have the sale. Okay. What percentage of people make it from estimate to sale? Again, let's say it's 60%. And is that? No, that's it. Great. Finally, what is the average dollar value of a customer completing a sale? And we're going to use an average ticket of $3,800. So now we've gone through this and you can see the entire sales funnel here, right? Phone call, 90% make it to a book appointment, 95% make it to the in-person consult, 100% make it to an estimate, 60% make it to a sale. So this is going to tell us that all the way back at the beginning, that phone call is worth $1,900. Now, I've had people go, wow, I can afford to spend $1,900 to get a phone call? No, not unless you have zero overhead and you don't care about making a profit or pulling in a paycheck, right? This is your absolute break even, assuming no other costs, right? So that's I always think Google's a little shady with this number here.
Yeah, there's the cost of driving there, the cost of gas, insurance.
There's tons. So what I usually do from this point is I say, okay, now go back and look at this number, this $3,800 number, and say, what am I willing to spend to close that sale? And I always pose it this way: is I ask clients, I go, what would you say, Josh? I'll take as many sales as you can give me if I know they only are going to cost me X. What is that number? Every business is going to be different. Even with businesses in the same niche, I've seen wildly different answers at this stage. Why? Let's take our window treatment person. One might have a large staff doing the work. She's paying the staff less than she pays herself, so her overhead on each job is less. And she's also willing to take a smaller profit on each job because she has high volume. But someone else in the same business might be running a one-man show and they do everything. So they need to make a larger percentage of profit on each job until they can afford to expand. But I would usually say the general rule of thumb is you probably are willing to close the sale. You're probably willing to spend usually somewhere between 10 and 25% of this number. So let's just be conservative here. Let's say I'm willing to spend $380 to get a $3,800 sale. All right, so you click edit to put that number back into Google system. You say calculate. All right, yeah, 10% of that. So now we have our true cost per lead. We're willing to spend $194 a phone call. And if we're spending $194 a phone call and we're confident in all of these other numbers, then we know every time we spend $194, we're going to generate a $3,800 sale. And getting these numbers right and getting this cost per lead number right is your holy grail. This is the aha moment, because if you trust this number and you're confident in this number, you know when you're looking at your marketing reports, if I'm spending less than $194 a lead, I'm making money. And if it's consistently less than that and you have the bandwidth to handle more business, well, then it's time to increase the budget, because 100% guarantee you're going to generate more profit if you're staying under this target cost per lead. Now, if you're over that, you get a marketing report and we're at $300. Well, no, don't spend more money. Either scale back. Maybe we need to figure out if the goal is realistic, or we need to figure out what areas of your sales funnel or your marketing campaign we can improve to get the number where we need it to be. But getting this number is a critical point in making sure that you're getting that return on your ad spend and making sure that you are You're generating that profit. You're guaranteed that every dollar I spend on my marketing is generating me money because I know this number is accurate.
So it's important to know your cost, your overall cost in the business. And I have to say, I think you'll probably agree with me. A lot of the smaller companies really struggle with this, and even some of the larger companies, because then you ultimately are even tracking the conversion ratio per rep, which could impact these numbers. So much data to track that most companies don't do a good job unless they've got a CFO that knows what they're doing. So let's talk about beyond the know your numbers, know your business, know your cost. What about market research and customer insights? What role does that play into planning marketing investments?
Yeah, it definitely plays a role, right? It's important. And so, let's look at our window treatment business again. What products you're marketing would largely be dependent on your geographic region, right? I mean, this is not complicated. If your territory is in Florida, we're probably marketing hurricane shutters. In California, not so much, and even within your sales area, understanding local demographics plays a role. In our example, we use the average sale price of $3,800. And when you first start out, we want to probably be looking at broad numbers across everything. But eventually, we want to get more granular, right? This zip code is more affluent and has an average ticket price of $5,200. That's going to change how we market in that little zip code. Oh, this zip code is lower income, has an average ticket price of $2,900. Well, that's going to dramatically change our goal as far as our cost per lead. Again, knowing that kind of detail can have a huge impact on profitability long term. Don't want to get hung up on needing to know every last stat when we're first starting. We're not going to have it all, right? But find a starting point, and a lot of times that's broader. And then with time, we want to get more and more granular with our data, and give every piece of information you have to your marketing agency, and then ask them, what else do you want? What else would help you to drive more sales and generate greater profit margins for us? And because I'll tell you, a lot of times customers don't ask that and don't think to ask that. And so, but when they do, I think it definitely makes me think again about, oh, you know what, you're right. What I really could use is also this info. Oh yeah, I have that info. Sometimes I'm surprised, like, oh, you do? Oh yeah, I know my average ticket price by zip code. Yeah, let me give that to you. Oh, fantastic. That again will help us fine tune that marketing campaign.
Fantastic. Well, this is why bigger companies have revenue operations roles, because they spend time analyzing all this information so that they can provide the insights and the intelligence to be dynamic in how you make decisions. That's what I keep hearing. Got to be dynamic. Can't be fixed. Let's continue on. Let's talk about short-term versus long-term marketing investment goals. Can you give me some examples on how to balance those? In the first episode, we talked about the top of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel, the importance of investing first in the bottom of the funnel so you can get some quick sales results. But then, once that dries out, you need to reinvest in the middle of the funnel because you want to drive people there when they're ready. And of course, the top of the funnel plays a role too. It's not about having just one. It's about sequencing those investments correctly and doing it on a dynamic basis. But let's talk a little bit more about, there are sometimes short-term goals and longer-term goals that play into how you make these decisions. Give me some examples, if you could, on how to think about that for those who might be watching.
Sure, absolutely. So short-term, a lot of times it is bottom of funnel. Okay, how can we generate revenue now and make sure that our investment is a short-term investment? We're getting that money back that we can put back into the company. Long-term, maybe it's about growing your customer list, your email list, because we could certainly leverage an email list in lots of different ways. We could leverage it by, I'll give you an example actually with how we could leverage an email list. Let's say, again, back to window treatments. Let's say we have the keyword blinds. Okay. Blinds is such a broad term that it is probably an expensive keyword to advertise on. You think, oh, well, obviously I want to show up for the keyword blinds, but that person is so early in their process that they're probably really not ready to make that purchase. And so your conversion rates on that keyword are going to be very low. And so it's going to be a very expensive keyword because we talk about the goal, let's say for a phone call is $194. Let's say you go through the process and you realize, on blinds, it's $420.
Yeah. And the blind store might be spending millions of dollars on that keyword.
Exactly. On just a branded keyword. But now let's say I have an email list of past customers or people who have expressed interest but haven't made a purchase. Well, now I can, once that list gets large enough, I can actually upload that list to Google or Facebook or any other multiple other channels and say, well, let's start with Google because we're talking about a specific keyword, and say, okay, Google, I want to advertise on the keyword blinds, but only to people who are in this list. Now I've dramatically changed my target market. And now, whereas if it was untargeted of the keyword blinds, yeah, I'm paying $420 a lead. But once I narrow it down to only the people who search blinds that are in this list, suddenly, guess what? I'm back closer or right at my goal of where I need to be. But that's a long-term strategy, right? You have to build up that list. And I think Google, it's escaping me now how many people have to be in that list. I think it's at least 1,000. And it has to be 1,000 matches, which usually means we have to upload 2,000 people before we could use the list. So there's an example, short-term versus long-term, working our way through to get more and more granular and have more and more data to work with. And like you said, eventually work our way up to mid-funnel and upper funnel campaigns as well.
It sounds very similar the way if you're starting a business, you would look at the total addressable marketplace, the TAM opportunity in the marketplace, but then you would make sure that you bring it down to the serviceable available market, right? The SAM. So, in startups are always thinking about what's the big opportunity? Well, it's $1 billion marketplace. Well, how much of that $1 billion can you really go after? Well, we're going after this segment of that, which is worth $50 million, right? And so am I hearing correctly that, when it comes to your marketing dollars, you should understand your overall market opportunity, but then know where you're playing, sort of the lane you want to play in. And if you have a list of potential interested parties, or you can create a nice list of interested party, you can even narrow down that lane to specific individuals that could be buyers. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really does get fun. Some of the targeting options out there are pretty crazy. And that's where it gets fun, is when you get to those mid funnel and upper funnel campaigns. The more targeted you are in those campaigns, the more successful you're going to be. And that it gets really fun when you get to some of those targeting tools.
Yeah, I'm surprised sometimes in the advertising space or marketing space, we don't have to think of it that way. It's like, what is the actual serviceable marketplace, i.e. the available marketplace, right? Because something might have already been locked in by some other players. So let's finalize this conversation with, how does goal setting affect the calculation and the interpretation of ROAS? Because we talked about setting goals, setting expectations that are correct. We talked about how to do that in a way that's short-term, long-term, and being dynamic, but also in terms of how do you actually calculate and interpret these things towards ROAS?
Yeah, it is really important when you're talking about goal setting to go back and revisit that calculator periodically. We talked about demographic targeting, maybe using different average sales values based on zip code. Obviously, that's going to make a difference in our target cost per lead. But, if you can pull up that screen one more time, again, you look at every step in your sales funnel here, and we have a 60% conversion rate for estimate to sale. But again, we were guessing on that. What if after 3 months of tracking it, we realized, oh, you know what? It's actually only 45%. Okay, well, that dramatically changes our goal down to 146. And we would need to make adjustments to stay profitable. But let's go on the flip side. Let's say you want to look at, as a business owner or marketing manager, you want to look at that sales funnel and identify areas where you could improve, and that's really outside the reins of your marketing agency, but internally looking at, okay, what are the areas of this sales funnel that we could improve? Because if I could improve that conversion rate from, let's say, 60% even to 68%, well, now suddenly I go from 194 to 220. And you say, well, what's the difference? Why does that matter? And the reason it matters is because when we have a lower target, there's going to be keywords that are just too expensive for us to bid on, and we're going to have to shut them off or not show up at all. So by improving the conversion rates at various steps in the sales funnel, it opens things up a lot, and it allows you to advertise on keywords that are suddenly profitable. So we want to be able to revisit this periodically and see, hey, again, we talked about how important it is to be confident in this number. We don't want to stick on this number and go 5 years from now, we're still using the same number. We absolutely should not be using the same number 5 years from now, because the market could have changed. Hopefully we've improved stages of the sales funnel, but maybe there's areas that are not improved. And again, that you find areas where you can continue to improve in the sales funnel. And think about that too. What a difference it makes. I see sometimes where clients say, well, I tried pay-per-click and it doesn't work. And, think of what the difference is if your sales funnel is stronger on these steps and you can afford to spend $220 a lead, but your competition is not as good, and so they can only afford to spend $130 a lead. That's a huge competitive difference. Huge. So revisiting these numbers is a big factor in that goal setting and making sure that ROAS is continuing to improve as time goes on.
It sounds to me having an agency that cares enough to dig into these things is going to make a huge difference in the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's going to play into, I think, our next one, where we talk about, yes, we've figured out this number, but how do we track it, right? It does you not very much good to know what the target should be if then you can't track, are we hitting the target? So that's really the next stage.
Excellent. And so with that, the next episode, we're going to talk about measuring your marketing investment performance. And the title of the next show will be Crunching the Numbers, Measuring Marketing Performance for Better ROAS. So if you want to learn about how to be effective at measuring these numbers so that you're hitting the mark every time, come back and check out the next episode. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and see you again soon.